Welcome to the Silph podcast. My name is Matt.
And my name is Debbie.
And today we are talking about the legendary, the mythical Pokemon Mew. And for those of you who listened to our last week's episode, I hope you figured that out from our Who's That Pokemon segment, which is what we're going to do to share our next one every week.
So if you guess the sound of the Pokemon, you'll have a hint about what we're going to talk about next week.
Exactly, and I'm sure it's extremely hard because I made it extremely hard.
I actually didn't know it was Mew, and I knew that we were talking about Mew this week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Crazy. I can't believe that you, out of all people, knew it was Mew. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
But to explain this podcast, for if you're new to the podcast, is we are a podcast, a fan-made podcast that talks about theories of Pokemon and legends and tell a story and talk about the different theories made by the fans of these Pokemon.
So we hope that we're going to reveal to you a little bit about Mew, even though a lot of this comes from the games and the anime and the manga. You might already know it, but we feel like it's one of the most important stories in the whole Pokemon universe because Mew was one of the original mythical Pokemon.
Of course. But before we get started, we actually have a quick little segment or a quick little cool piece of information. It doesn't really fit with the rest of this what we're going to talk about Mew. We're going to call it a quick ball. So you'll hear a little quick box sound effect right here. All right. Mew was trademarked in 1990, 5 years before the term Pokemon was trademarked. So Mew is the first Pokemon, meaning it literally was created first by the people that made the Pokemon game, which is
or it was
pretty
the first
awesome.
Trademarked name, at least.
Yeah, I guess right on.
I mean, we can talk for ages about what the first Pokemon is.
Yeah. But this is the first one that's trademarked, which is really cool. And it's kind of unique because in their games, that's how a lot of those Pokemon got leaked for the new Sun and Moon version was the trademarks of certain names where people started figuring out about Solgaleo and Lunala from the new Sun and Moon games. So it's cool that Pokemon as a company still continues to trademark their games before the games are even released or announced sometimes. So
well, I guess really they need to. It's the legal thing. But what's really interesting, I guess, with the Mew is that it was 5 years before Pokemon, before the term Pokemon. So that's a long time. Because if I remember correctly, Solgaleo and Lunala, they were only leaked a few months beforehand.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
but
anyway.
that just shows the evolution of the Pokemon as a company.
Wow.
Pretty good. Well, before we get into the theories of Mew and explain, let's explain the story of Mew. So here we go. Deep in the jungles of Guyana, there were cave drawings that tell us the history lost through word of mouth or lack of sight. The ancient image of a cat-like creature etched into a wall of a ruined temple or tomb tells of a Pokemon who lived many centuries ago, presumably lost to nature. The etching of Mew and the lack of data surrounding its existence lead experts to believe that this Pokemon was extinct. But sometimes history appears again. Funded by Team Rocket, an expedition to Guyana led to a rediscovery of the elusive Pokemon by Dr. Fuji, a kind man who cares wholeheartedly for the well-beings of Pokemon, and who may be the same man or be related to the Mr. Fuji we discussed in last episode with Cubone. It is said that Mew appears only to those who are kind-hearted, indicating that Dr. Fuji was one such man. Unlike many of the legendary and mythical Pokemon we know of in the Pokemon world, Mew doesn't have a particular story of its own, but rather appears at the peripheries of many stories, witnessing of influencing events before disappearing until it chooses to be seen again.
It actually made this really, really hard to write. And it made it hard to collect all the information because it isn't a single story. Like with Mewtwo, you can go straight to Pokemon, the first movie if you want, and talk about Mewtwo there. But Mew plays a minor but kind of major part in a lot of different stories. And that's one of the cool things about Mew, that it appears so many times over and over again, doing little things but connecting everything together just by its mere presence.
Yeah, and it's just like Mew. The first time we see Mew in the TV show, at least, was like right in the beginning credits. He just shows up in the leaves, and you never see the Pokemon in the show until the very first movie comes out. So that's just kind of an example of Mew
he's in the opening song. The first two Pokemon you see, the first one is Mewtwo, then you see Mew, but you don't even see him in the series for a long time until the first movie. And that is even more interesting considering Mew was trademarked so much earlier than Pokemon. It didn't get shown for a long time. That's part of its mystery, I suppose, and why a lot of people really liked it.
And why a lot of people like Mew as well. Let's continue on, though. There's a few cool things I wanted to touch on, like kind of the first journal entries we see in the video games about Mew, and then we can start getting into the theories here. It says,
so these journal entries were found in fragments on Cinnabar Island in the Pokemon Mansion, and they kind of allude or detail in a very, very basic way what we know of the history of Mew.
Yeah. And Cinnabar Island, for those who don't know, is where you get the 7th gym badge, because I didn't know Cinnabar Island's name for a long time. All right. July 5th. Diary. July 5th. Guyana, South America. A new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle. July 10th. We christened the newly discovered Pokemon Mew, which means named, I believe. Is that what christened means?
Yeah, named.
All right, cool. February 6th, so which is, pay attention to that, that's like 6 months later. February 6th, Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo. Very original. September 1st, which is another like 6 months. Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its vicious tendencies. And that's the end of the journal entries. That was found inside.
That's all we know about Mew. And so only 2 of those, 3 of those refer to Mew. One of them that they have a new Pokemon was discovered, and then it was named Mew, and then it gave birth to Mewtwo. And that all happened over 7 months.
Yeah, that's a really short amount of time if you think about it.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about it is that in July 5th entry in Guyana, South America, Guyana is quite heavily known for its Mayan influence. Is that correct?
Yes, and yes. When I lived in Guyana, it was it's in the Amazon forest, and in the Amazon rainforest, there's a lot of Mayan temples. So it's really well known for its Mayan temples being part of the Amazon River flowing through it, and also it's also really well known for having a lot of riches in the land because its main export is gold. There's a lot of gold mines in Guyana. So that's kind of a history of Guyana. It's really jungly. It's always rainy there. It's like being on an island pretty much where the weather never really changes from 70 degrees or I don't know. That's Fahrenheit and 30 degrees Celsius. Is that right? Is that too hot? Is that way hot?
It's like an average day of an American summer. It would be cool, it's cold, let's not go to the beach.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's kind of like a normal.
Warm.
It's just warm. It's like a lukewarm place.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing that is very, very interesting about that is that it refers to a real life place.
Yes.
Pokemon doesn't often do that. So you do get regions that are based on places in the world, but there are very, very few instances of when it says this Pokemon or this person. So Lieutenant Surge, is it Lieutenant Surge who is specifically supposed to be American?
Yes.
Yeah. And but it's not common, and it gets even less common in later games. So this being a real world place is even more interesting because it suggests that the Pokemon world is actually in our world.
Yeah, that we live in the Pokemon world. So it's really cool because the art sculptures or the cave drawings of Mew is possibly found in those temples, and so that's really cool. It's really unique to be able to have that real life place to look at. And so the most prominent legend that Mew has appeared in is that of Mewtwo, the thing that it gave birth to. A genetically modified Pokemon created from the DNA of Mew with the purpose of becoming a super weapon, because Team Rocket is the ones who found it. Red found himself on Cinnabar Island, and that's where he learned about the journal entries. And so Mewtwo is, we can't talk about Mew without talking about Mewtwo. And so during this time period, Team Rocket did experiments on Mew to be able to take its genes and be able to create, or kind of like make it give birth to this like super weapon, super creature Mewtwo that is stronger and more powerful, kind of an unstable clone, if you will, of the very first Pokemon. And yeah, that's
scary. Yeah, so it was
really scary.
Created as a weapon. That's a common theme in a lot of stories. Wolverine was created to be a weapon, for example. Is that right?
Yep.
And so Mewtwo was as well. And what seems to have happened is that Mew was the base DNA, and then Mewtwo had been spliced with a lot of DNA from other Pokemon or animals to become Mewtwo. And it's actually, cloning is really hard, of course, but with animals, you take the embryo when it's a single cell because you need to change the DNA. It's really hard to change the DNA of lots of different cells. It's much easier to do it with one cell. So you change the DNA, you inject their DNA or do whatever mutations you need to do to it. Then you have to put it back into an animal that is similar to the new embryo that you've made so that it can give birth. So one of the things that people have been talking about for a long time is cloning mammoths and injecting them into elephants so that the elephants can give birth. So one of the reasons for Mew needing to give birth was that it was probably, it seems pretty likely actually, the base genome from what Mewtwo was based on or created with, and so it had to have been given birth to by a Mew, not another Pokemon. It would be too different. And so a lot of the time when you do cloning as well, you put the embryo back in the animal and then it doesn't grow.
Yeah.
So
science
the fact that they were able to do this in 6 months or 7 months blows my mind. Absolutely. Like, we need some of that technology, not to make super weapons, just to make all of our science a lot faster. But either way, Mew gave birth to Mewtwo.
And what's interesting is that Team Rocket was trying to make a super weapon, and the myth about Mew, as we read in the very beginning of the story I mentioned, is that it only shows itself to kind-hearted men, and Dr. Fuji worked for Team Rocket. And so the big question rises up is, while it's being held captive in Cinnabar Island, did the Mew feel like it was being abused, or did it do this willingly, to be able to create this thing that they didn't think was going to be a monster? Because it seems like in the very last journal entry, it seems like Team Rocket is surprised that Mewtwo is far too powerful. Maybe they were just trying to create their own Pokemon, or be able to see if if the legends are true, that Mew was the first that gave birth to many. Yeah,
I guess it's never specifically said, but there is a lot of evidence to point to the fact that that Dr. Fuji is Mr. Fuji that we know about from the Cubone story, who went and confronted Team Rocket when they were trying to do some bad things in Lavender Town. And it is, one possibility is that back then, when Dr. Fuji was looking in Guyana for Mew, he was a really kind-hearted person, and he didn't know what Team Rocket was doing. He didn't know why they wanted Mew. He may have been forced to go there against his will. And so I think one likely theory is that he was working for Team Rocket, not knowing how bad they were, found Mew, brought Mew back, became very, very disillusioned with what they were doing, maybe in how they were treating Mew, or he saw that they were making a weapon. He didn't agree with that. And then he broke away from Team Rocket, and then he decided not to be Dr. Fuji anymore. He became Mr. Fuji because he was ashamed of his role in the whole,
in creating the powerful Pokemon,
and potentially the abuse of Mew.
Yeah, and so that's really interesting about everything. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's likely that Mew was abused, because from what Mewtwo talks about, Mewtwo is a very, very damaged Pokemon, and it seems like whatever experiments it was subjected to were very painful, and it was very, very bitter about all non-cloned Pokemon and humans because of it. So If they were nice to Mew and not to Mewtwo, it seems a bit strange. It seems like for consistency's sake, Mew was also not treated
abused
very well.
and kept in a test tube, which is interesting because Mew can teleport, I thought, so I don't know. I would always think it would like teleport away, but maybe they made some sort of device that keeps it like a Pokeball. Never mind. Yeah. I'm retarded. All right.
No, but there could quite potentially be some sort of device that was keeping it from teleporting away, because we've seen other Pokemon be wasn't there one episode where Pikachu was put in a little box where it couldn't do its Thunderbolt very well?
That's true.
Yeah, so who knows? I mean, there is also the idea that in the first movie, Pokemon the first movie, that is presumably the same Mew. It might not be the same Mew as gave birth to Mewtwo, but it is not angry at humans.
That's actually interesting right there, because what if Team Rocket successfully just cloned Mew and made an exact replica and then just let the other Mew go and then continued experimenting on the cloned Mew?
Well, there's nothing to suggest that there is only one Mew in the world, other than that there is only one Mew in the game.
Yeah.
And we've seen from lots of different movies there are more than one mythical Pokemon, because I know there's more, seems to be more than one Mewtwo. There's the Mewtwo that's really angry and tries to kill all the clones, and later on in the movie with Genesect, I think, there's another Mewtwo, and it seems to be quite nice and wants to save Pokemon.
I didn't. So maybe they did successfully clone Mew to be regular and then just expanded upon it.
I guess it is also a normal Pokemon, and it could maybe breed, and there may be more than one Mew. They just don't show up very often.
And we just can't do that in the game because we're not cool enough, I guess.
Yeah, and because it's a game, we're limited to that.
Which is interesting because, like, the cloning and everything, there's, of course, the Pokemon that's in the universe called Ditto, who clones everything. And Mew is actually a Pokemon that can learn transform just like Ditto, which is really unique as well, right? Am I right on that, or am I lying about that?
Yeah, because Ditto and Mew can learn transform. Like, they just learn it by themselves. They don't need a TM. The other Pokemon that can change, which is Smeargle, it doesn't change its body. It just sketches the moves. And there is, I suppose, Zoroark, which can learn illusion, but that wears off.
Yeah.
So there are these other Pokemon that can kind of mimic things, and mimic is a move, but it's only those two Pokemon that actually can learn transform. And we know in one of the movies, I can't remember which movie, I'm sorry, Mew actually does change form, and it changes to be like a Pidgeotto and stuff like that to play with the other Pokemon. So it can physically transform.
See, that's what's interesting is maybe, I don't know, that's really weird. And there's a theory that you kind of know a little bit more about, the embryonic theory. Right?
The embryo, yep. So
sorry, embryonic.
Yep, no problem.
I can't read my handwriting, so.
Yeah, so science. That's I really like science.
Science,
for
yeah. This is very sciencey.
To know. I love science. I am a scientist, so that's like my whole life.
Yeah.
Mew, looking at Mew, it seems a little bit like it has been influenced by an embryo. It does have a kind of embryonic look about it, and that's like the big head, and then it like rolls up in a little ball with its long tail, and so that kind of might be similar to a real theory in science, which is called the recapitulation theory. And that is basically that if you look at lots and lots of different embryos from lots of different species of animal, and I'm talking like fish, humans, rabbits, birds, lots of different embryos, they look very similar. They have a very similar physiology. They have a large head, and they have the backbone that comes around and a little bit of a tail. So
I mean, even us as humans, like we too have a tail, right? Inside, like, as we
have a tailbone, yeah. And that doesn't grow into a long tail like, well, Mew has or a cat has or something like that. But it is very interesting to see how many different embryos that eventually grow into hugely different animals, and like not just ones that give live birth, but ones that are in eggs as well. They look very, very similar at that stage. And that's really interesting because there is the suggestion that Mew is the genetic ancestor of all Pokemon, and it has this allusion to how all embryos also look the same or very, very similar.
Yes, and you want to you wrote a really cool article on Pokemon Amino about Mew being the ancestor Pokemon. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, go for it.
I do have a lot of science about Mew and whether it really is the genetic ancestor of all Pokemon. If you actually want to read this transcript, it might be easier to follow along. You can look on WordPress for Dubious Caesar, and I have this theory up there at the moment, and that's just about all the different ways that Mew could be the genetic ancestor of all present-day Pokemon. Now, before I start this is based on the Pokedex entry, which says that people or scientists believe that Mew is the genetic ancestor of all Pokemon. So this is based heavily on whether you believe that the Pokedex entry is true.
Let me read that real fast. It says, Mew, number 151 in the Pokedex. It says, Mew is said to possess the genetic composition of all Pokemon. It is capable of making itself invisible at will, so entirely avoids notice if it approaches people. Also, one more quick cool thing is in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. It says, for a Pokedex entry, it says, a new species of Pokemon, an extremely rare Pokemon that contains the DNA of all other Pokemon. It is thought by many scholars to be a Pokemon ancestor considering the wide range of moves it can use. On top of making itself turn invisible, Mew can also transform into any opponent Pokemon and use characteristics and moves in the exact same way. So I actually thought that was really cool because I didn't know Super Smash Bros. Gave Pokedex entries, but that was one of the coolest ones they talked about Mew because that's also sanctioned by Pokemon is whatever they write about it. So that's kind of what the Pokemon company has told us about it. So go ahead with Ancestor, Ancestry.com.
So in science, when we talk about a genetic ancestor, we don't necessarily mean that it has exactly the same genes as what we have today. It may have precursor genes. It means that somewhere along the line, assuming that it's Darwinian evolution, there was an ancestor that had some babies, and over time, new species arose, but they shared this common ancestor. And the genes that Pokemon had would have changed due to mutation. What is interesting here is it says it contains all the DNA of Pokemon. It doesn't necessarily say that it is the ancestor of Pokemon and has precursor genes. I think that probably this is just a little bit of a muck-up in the Pokedex entry, and it might be saying that Mew is the genetic ancestor of Pokemon, has a lot of precursor genes which experience mutations and eventually led to speciation, and there became lots of species.
So, for example, this would be close to a real-life theory that we all heard about is is it the Darwin theory?
Darwinian evolution, yeah.
Darwinian
so the theory of evolution, the origin of the species, based on the theory that Darwin wrote, and has changed over time, of course. But
which is the theory that we came from monkeys, correct? And or the human life came from monkeys. But there's also another theory.
Not really, but it means that humans and other apes had a genetic ancestor, which currently is no longer alive.
Sure, yeah. I don't know the specifics. That's just
you
like
will have probably learned about this theory in school.
See, I didn't, but yeah.
You did it, sure. But a lot of people have. But everybody's heard of the theory of evolution. So if you do want to know more about the, how this theory of evolution relates to the theory that Mew is genetic ancestor, jump on WordPress and Dubious Caesar. I'll give you a lot more background about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very hard to explain in a small amount of time, of course. Yeah, so that's one theory. I don't really think that theory holds up because that means that Mew is an ancient Pokemon. So I would attribute it to something like the Archaeopteryx. Do you know what the Archaeopteryx is? Yeah,
which is a fossil Pokemon, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fossil. And it's actually the basis of, Archaeops. And it is a real fossil in real life, the Archaeopteryx, that is the genetic ancestor, presumably the genetic ancestor of reptiles and birds.
Yeah, like the thing that everyone always talks about when Jurassic Park comes out is in Jurassic Park, the coolest part of the movie is the velociraptors, and then somebody told me about how they are actually like the same skeleton as like a chicken, and so you look at a chicken.
So
and
the
like,
genetic ancestor of a chicken. Yeah.
Of a velociraptor. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So that would have meant that Mew either lives for millions of years and therefore hasn't evolved because you don't evolve in one generation, or that every Mew that was born experienced absolutely no genetic mutation.
I could see Mew actually living forever though, because we don't really have a good time frame. Yeah, I don't think we really have a good time frame of how long Pokemon have been here on Earth or in the Pokemon universe. But if you think about where these old stories were found, is they were found inside these old Mayan temples of people of the past. And if you want to think about it as, I mean, this gets a little religious about what the Mayans are, but why they built those temples is in the Pokemon universe could be maybe to worship Mew or have Mew visit them there or something like that, as some sort of like godlike mythical Pokemon thing, where we all know that deity of the Pokemon universe is Arceus or Arceus or whatever. I don't know how to say it, but
I looked it up, and apparently
it's Arceus.
It was originally Arceus, but then because it sounds like a naughty word, they officially changed it to Arceus, the pronunciation.
Oh, Arse. Oh, I didn't even think of that till you just said that. So yeah,
well, I'm a child, so I think about that, of course.
You think about Arse all the time? Cool. Good one. But yeah, they could have made those Mayan temples to like praise Mew, to tell those stories of Mew and have Mew show up and be there. And like, if he's the genetic mutation of Pokemon and he's been here forever, could that say, this is getting a little crazy, but could that say that the humans in the Pokemon universe could also be a genetic modification from Mew as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have absolutely no problem thinking that Mew lived for millions of years, because we know other mythological Pokemon that do. Obviously, Xerneas lives over and over and kind of keeps getting reborn and doing different things, and it lives for ages. So I don't have a problem with Mew also doing that, living for a really long time. Whether it is the genetic ancestor and everything evolved from Mew, I find that a little bit far-fetched. Then you think it's a little bit more far-fetched? Idea that Arceus made everything, and then there's the theory that when Arceus made all the different Pokemon, it made Mew as a backup, like a USB drive or a blueprint, and put all the DNA, genetic information into Mew, so that if something happened, it could just remake everything because it's got all that backup system.
I did not know that one.
Yeah,
is that a true thing that was said about the Legend of Arceus? Or Arceus?
No, it's not one of the true ones. That's just a fan theory, but I thought that was really interesting. And it was one explanation of why it has all the DNA. I do have one more theory that I was thinking about, and this is not based on science. This is just based on things.
Pokemon,
it has Transform. It has the move Transform, and Ditto also has the move Transform. And we know with Ditto, when Ditto uses Transform, it genetically becomes the same as another species, and it can breed with that other species. Mew can't breed with any species, even if it uses Transform. Well, we don't know that. We just know it can't breed. So it might not actually genetically be becoming the same as the Pokemon, or if it is, it's becoming the Pokemon in the same way as Ditto is. So it has all the information to be able to transform, but it doesn't necessarily have all the genes. And it was a mistake on the scientist part, because they got a bit confused because it can use Transform.
Oh, so you're thinking that the Pokedex entry is actually like misinformation from the scientists?
I think that's more likely, and I think that based on, if you just go and read the Pokedex entries, man, they're like crazy. Like Larvitar eats a whole mountain. Really? Does it really eat a whole mountain? Because then you would have like no mountains because there are too many Larvitars. Even one Larvitar eating a mountain in a day is going to eat all the mountains. Anyway, so I think it's a misinformation on that side. And I think it was a bit of confusion, possibly because Mew can transform. And it's like rearranging its DNA every time it transforms. And so it has all the codes because it has the ability to rearrange its DNA. And DNA, fun fact, is made up of only, well, we call them nucleotides. They're 4 nucleotides: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And depending on the combination of those 4, you get every single gene and every single protein that your body makes, just based on these 4 letters. Or 4
That's
codes.
interesting.
Like binary, except 4, not 2. So I think maybe it's doing that. That's one one possible way. But I also do like the idea that it's very, very ancient.
Yes, I too like that idea of having Mew be an ancient Pokemon, and that's really interesting. Like now I'm just thinking about Arceus making Mew as a backup drive. Like that to me sounds amazing. I think that's like a really legit theory.
Yeah, I really like it. And it definitely ties the origin of Pokemon being created from Arceus to Mew without Mew being the first Pokemon. Because, see, we do have all these fossil Pokemon. We have like Aerodactyl and stuff like that, which...
It got extinct or got preserved.
Yeah, it went extinct. So I used to, like, is it saying that Mew was before Aerodactyl, or did Aerodactyl come before Mew? But if they were made by Arceus in the beginning and then Aerodactyl got extinct by itself, I think that makes a lot of sense.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting, like as I said, like last week, and how the story of Arceus and all these legendary, like Mew and all of them, sound very similar to the legends and myths or stories we hear of today too, so, with us. So it's a very side-by-side comparison. It's very cool to be able to see that in a video game always make the same thing.
Yeah,
like
well,
us,
I mean, a lot of Pokemon is based on
animals and
mythology.
creatures. Yeah.
That's very, very common, and I think that obviously the creation story
creationism
influenced Arceus and Arceus making everything, and I thought, putting that together, it is of course a fan theory. It isn't something that is.
No, this is all just fan theories, and that's what we leave up to our listeners, is to be able to expound to them what these theories are, and maybe even hear more theories from you. And so what do you guys think? Do you think that Mew is the ancestor of all Pokemon, that Mew was actually just maybe created by Arceus, and everything eventually evolved from Mew? It was multiple Mews, and all of a sudden it turned into, a Slowbro, because it decided it needed to go fishing, and then it had other abilities to continue to move forward? Or do you think that Arceus made Mew as a backup thing, or what is your theories on Mew?
Is it literally the genetic ancestor of all Pokemon? Does it literally contain the DNA of all Pokemon?
Yeah.
What do you think?
So, what do you guys think? What are some theories that you have heard that we did not mention today? And you can let us know at silphscopepodcast@gmail.com, and we will read your emails and get back to you, and hopefully read them on the show if we don't record back to back like we did with this one. But Debbie, you were talking about where you have this theory at. Where can they find you, and where can they read all your scientific theories?
Yep, so if you want to hear any of the theories, they're usually a mixture of Pokemon and using that to explain real-world science. And obviously today I touched very lightly on Darwinian evolution and being the genetic ancestor of different Pokemon. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to WordPress and look up my name, which is Dubious Caesar. I'll spell that out for you because you might not know. DOOBIUSCAESAR. And if you look on there, I've got all sorts of theories, and you can peruse through them, see whether you agree with them or not, and hopefully learn a little bit more about science in the process.
Yes, and for me, if you wish to follow me and learn more information about the podcast and so forth, or see when I'm streaming or whatever, you can find me on Twitter at NuzlockeMatty, NUZLOCKE, Matty, MATTY. So just look us up there, and you can ask us any questions there as well. But anyways, that's our show, and before we get going,